Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. The rain poured down in torrents, the kind of rain that drenches you to the bone and makes the air thick with dampness. It was the sort of storm that seemed to have no end, as if the heavens themselves were trying to wash away the world. In the heart of the mountain village of Greenridge, the road leading through the dense forest was no longer recognizable. It had become a thick, muddy mess, a slip and slide that made even the hardiest of travelers think twice. Lila Thompson, drenched to the skin, struggled forward, her heart heavy with exhaustion. She pulled her son, Ben, closer to her as the cold rain soaked them both. Ben, only 6 years old, was barely hanging on. His tiny feet were caked in mud, and his once bright eyes now had a dull, vacant look. His lips were turning pale from the cold, and the exhaustion had rendered him speechless, his little hands grasping at his mother's coat in a desperate attempt to hold on. Lila could feel the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. Every step she took was harder than the last. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body shaking from the cold and exhaustion.
Ben,
Her son was all that kept her going. She couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to fail him. They had left the city in search of a new life, far from the painful memories of the life she had left behind. But in the mountains, they had found nothing but hardship. Just a little further, Lila whispered to herself. Even though she wasn't sure she believed it, the thought of returning to the life she had just escaped was too much to bear. But the world around her seemed intent on reminding her that escape wasn't always possible. The storm was getting worse. The wind howled through the trees, the branches creaking and bending as if the entire forest was alive and angry. The path ahead, once a familiar dirt road, was now nearly impassable, covered in a slick layer of mud and puddles that seemed to swallow their steps. Suddenly, Ben stopped walking. He had no strength left. His body sagged, and his little feet gave way under him. Lila caught him just before he hit the ground. "Ben," she cried, panic rising in her chest as she held him in her arms. His small body was ice cold, his face pale, his eyes barely open. "Mom,
I'm
cold," he murmured weakly. "Hold on, baby," Lila said, trying to steady herself, trying to make herself believe that they would make it through. But deep down, she was terrified. There was no one else on this isolated mountain road. There was no one to help them, and they were miles away from the nearest house, from any shelter. And then, as if the heavens themselves had heard her desperate plea, she saw him. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared through the pouring rain, walking with purpose, his silhouette sharp against the dark backdrop of trees. Ethan Carter, a local from Greenridge, was heading down the road, his broad shoulders covered by a worn jacket. He moved with a calmness that was foreign to the chaos around him, and his steady footsteps seemed to cut through the storm as if he were impervious to the elements. Lila's first instinct was to turn away, to continue on her own, to keep her son safe in the shelter of her arms. But something in Ethan's gaze caught her. There was no judgment there, just the look of someone who had seen hardship before and wasn't afraid of it. He didn't flinch when he saw her, soaked and trembling with a sickly pale son in her arms. "Hey, are you all right?" Ethan's voice was deep, clear, and surprisingly warm in contrast to the cold air. His presence felt like a beacon of safety in the storm. Lila, despite herself, felt a flicker of hope. I don't know," she said, her voice weak, barely a whisper against the wind. She looked down at Ben, whose eyes were closed now, his breath shallow. Panic bubbled up in her chest. I need help.
He's too weak.
I don't know what to do." Ethan quickly assessed the situation, his eyes flicking over Lila and then to Ben. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "Come with me. There's a cabin just down the road. I'll get him warm and help you both." Lila hesitated for just a second, the weight of pride and self-sufficiency pulling at her. She had always done everything on her own. But the look in Ethan's eyes left no room for argument. He wasn't offering pity, he was offering help. Real help. The kind of help she had never expected to find. I can't take him much further, she whispered, almost in defeat. Ethan nodded. No one could. He gently took Ben from her arms. His grip strong but tender. I'll carry him. You follow me. Lila didn't know what else to do. She didn't have the strength to protest. She followed Ethan, step by step, through the storm. The wind howled and the rain beat against them, but something about Ethan's steady presence gave her the strength to keep moving. They finally arrived at his cabin, a modest, weather-beaten structure nestled between towering pines. The warmth inside felt like a welcome embrace. Ethan quickly took Ben inside, settling him onto a worn couch by the fire. Lila followed, still shaking, though the warmth from the fire seemed to chase some of the cold away. As Ethan prepared blankets and brought out some tea, Lila sat down beside her son, tears of relief streaming down her face. She hadn't realized how badly she had been holding it all together until now. Thank you, Lila managed to say, her voice shaky. You saved us. Ethan smiled, a faint, knowing smile. Don't mention it. Just rest. You and your son are safe here. You're not alone anymore. And just like that, in the midst of the storm, Lila found the first glimmer of hope in days. She didn't know what the future held, but for now it was enough to know that someone cared. And maybe, just maybe, the storm outside could be weathered. The storm had passed, but the remnants of its fury still lingered in the air. The sky, once dark and brooding, now appeared heavy with a dull gray mist. The sun, barely peeking through the clouds, cast a faint light over the landscape. Lila sat by the fire in Ethan's cabin, her back pressed against the soft fabric of the armchair. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the rim of the cup in her hands, the warmth of the tea offering only a temporary reprieve from the whirlwind of emotions inside her. For the first time in days, the weight of exhaustion seemed to lift slightly, and she let her shoulders relax. Ben, her son, was finally asleep, his body curled up on the small couch with blankets tucked around him. Lila watched him for a moment, a soft smile pulling at her lips as she admired his peaceful face.
He was safe now.
He was warm, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that things could be okay. She couldn't remember the last time she had truly felt this level of comfort. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of pine wood and earth mixed with the lingering aroma of the stew Ethan had made for them. There was something soothing about this place. The soft flicker of the flames, the steady hum of the night outside, it was all so foreign to her. She had spent years avoiding being anchored to a place, always moving, always running from the pain of her past. But here, in this small cabin with Ethan, she felt at peace. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. He had been nothing but kind to her and Ben. He had offered them shelter without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. He had been calm when she was panicked, steady when she was uncertain. Lila had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on taking care of herself and her son. But with Ethan, she found herself in uncharted territory. She wanted to push him away, to keep her walls intact, but his presence made it increasingly difficult. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her with such genuine concern, without any agenda, without any expectation. Ethan's care for them didn't come with strings attached, and that frightened her. She had been burned by the ones who had promised to love her, only to leave her broken. Ethan wasn't like that. He was different. But that was precisely what made him dangerous. Lila was afraid to open herself up again. She didn't want to feel vulnerable. She didn't want to risk her heart. Lila's eyes flickered to Ethan, who was sitting across the room, gazing out the small window. The firelight played across his features, casting shadows on his face, but she could see the kindness in his expression. He had a quiet strength about him, the kind of strength that didn't need to be announced. It simply existed, like the air in the room, like the warmth of the fire. offering a sense of security without saying a word. "How's Ben doing?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. She looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "He's doing better," she replied quietly, her voice still rough from the past few days. "He's still weak, but he's sleeping now. He'll be okay." There was a vulnerability in her voice that she hadn't intended, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. His gaze softened as he nodded, his eyes reflecting the concern that had become familiar to her in the short time they had spent together. "Good," he said simply. "He's a strong kid." Lila nodded in agreement, though she didn't respond right away. Her thoughts were tangled. She had been so focused on surviving, so intent on keeping Ben safe, that she hadn't allowed herself to process everything that had happened. It was hard to admit that a part of her was still reeling from the shock of the last few weeks. The fear, the loss, the uncertainty, it all weighed on her shoulders like an anchor. But here, in this little cabin, in the presence of a man who asked for nothing in return, she felt the heaviness begin to lift. If only just a little. "You've really helped us," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady and warm. "You don't have to thank me," he said with a small smile. "It's the least I could do." "But you didn't have to help us," she said, her words tumbling out before she could stop them. She bit her lip, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she sounded. "We're strangers. You don't even know us." Ethan shrugged, as if the question didn't matter. Everyone deserves help when they need it. It's not about knowing each other. It's about doing what's right. His words were simple, but they cut through the fog in her mind. Lila had always been independent, always believed that relying on others was a weakness. But what if he was right? What if there was more to life than just surviving? What if the real strength came from allowing others to help, to let people in? The thought made her uneasy, but it also made her feel a strange warmth in her chest, a pull towards something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She turned away from Ethan, unable to meet his eyes, suddenly feeling exposed. Lila wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't used to someone being kind without expecting something in return. It made her feel vulnerable. Ethan didn't push her. He simply stood up, stretched his legs, and walked over to the small window near the door. The soft light of the setting sun filtered through the glass, casting a golden glow across the room. Lila watched him for a moment, his figure framed by the window, his shoulders relaxed, his presence unassuming but somehow powerful. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked casually, his voice calm, almost like an afterthought. Lila hesitated. A walk. It felt like too much, too soon. But something about the invitation felt safe, and it stirred a longing inside her that she didn't understand. The last few days had been nothing but chaos. Maybe she needed to clear her head, to step outside and breathe. "Okay," she said quietly, surprising herself with her own response. Ethan smiled at her, and this time, the smile reached his eyes. It wasn't a playful smile or a flirtatious one. It was genuine. He was simply offering her a moment of peace. Together, they stepped outside, and for the first time in days, Lila felt the cool air against her skin without the weight of worry hanging over her. The forest surrounding the cabin was quiet, peaceful, and the trees seemed to welcome her, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. The light from the setting sun filtered through the fog, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. For a brief moment, it felt as though time had slowed down, and all the worries of the past had been washed away with the storm. They walked side by side, neither of them saying much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable,
though.
It was comfortable in a way that Lila hadn't experienced in a long time. She didn't need to fill the space with words. Ethan was beside her, offering nothing but companionship, allowing her to be. As they continued walking, Lila realized that she had been so focused on the storm that she hadn't allowed herself to appreciate the calm,
the peace.
And it was here, in this moment, that she finally allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything on her own anymore. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she quickly buried it. Hope was dangerous. It was a slippery thing that could turn on you when you least expected it. And Lila wasn't ready to trust it again. For now, walking beside Ethan, in the quiet of the mountain evening, it didn't feel so dangerous. It felt like a small, fragile step toward something different. Something she wasn't ready to name yet, but something she was beginning to believe might exist. And that frightened her more than she was willing to admit. Lila walked alongside Ethan, each step more meaningful than the last. The stillness of the world around them was so different from the chaos of their pasts. For the first time in years, Lila felt like she could breathe. It was as if, in that moment, she wasn't defined by her past. She wasn't defined by the pain, by the heartbreak. Here, with Ethan, she was simply herself. She wasn't sure if it was the air or the silence between them, but something about that walk made her feel free. As they reached a clearing in the forest, Ethan stopped and looked at her. His expression calm, but his eyes reflecting a hint of curiosity, of unspoken understanding. "Do you know how long it's been since I've felt this free?" Lila asked quietly, almost to herself. Ethan nodded, his gaze gentle. "Sometimes, we forget what it's like to feel like we're not carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. I think we both understand that feeling, don't we?" For the first time, Lila looked at him without fear, without hesitation. There was something in his eyes that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was room for hope after all. The winds had shifted, bringing a chill that crept into the corners of Lila's heart. The sound of footsteps approaching her cabin echoed through the trees, as if the very ground was warning her of the storm that was about to arrive. She didn't know why, but she could feel it. Max was back. It had been years since Max walked away from their relationship, leaving Lila broken, questioning everything she had once believed in. His absence had left scars, deep, invisible ones. She had poured her heart into healing, into finding herself again. And for a while, she had believed she had succeeded. The bond she had formed with Ethan had been a refuge, a healing balm for her wounds. He had been patient, kind, and understanding, everything Max had failed to be. And yet, here she was again, standing at the edge of her past. The knock at the door was hesitant, almost as if Max wasn't sure if she would open it. But Lila knew, in that moment, that she had no choice but to face him. With a deep breath, she opened the door, her heart already pounding in her chest. And there he was, Max. His face had changed, more mature, yet still undeniably the same. His eyes, however, were different, filled with regret, guilt, and something else she couldn't quite place. "Lila," he began, his voice hoarse, as if the words had been stuck in his throat for years. "I didn't think you'd ever open the door." The moment she saw him, all the old feelings rushed back. Anger,
Pain.
longing, but above all, confusion. She had built a life without him, one that was starting to feel like something real, something permanent. And now he was here asking for what? For forgiveness? For another chance? She stepped aside, silently motioning for him to come in. Max hesitated for a moment before entering, his gaze never leaving hers. The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of their shared history bearing down on them both. "I didn't come back for myself," Max said, breaking the silence. His words were slow, careful. "I came back because I know I've wronged you. I know I've hurt you more than anyone ever could. And I need to tell you that I'm sorry, Lila. I've changed. I've spent years regretting how I left, how I treated you. I'm not the same person anymore." His apology hit Lila like a slap in the face. The nerve of him, to stand there and speak of change, to speak of regret, when he had left her without a second thought all those years ago. The betrayal still burned in her chest. How could she possibly believe that anything had really changed? "You can't just show up after all this time and expect everything to be fixed," Lila said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You broke me, Max. You walked away without a word, without a care. And now you want me to believe you've changed? That you've learned something? It doesn't work like that." She stepped back, the distance between them growing with every word. The anger she had buried deep inside her resurfaced, forcing its way out. You don't get to come back into my life and make everything okay. You don't get to erase the past. Max's face softened, the regret in his eyes deepening. I know I can't undo the past, he said quietly, but I can try to make things right. I can't ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret everything I did. I've spent years trying to find a way back to you, and I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try again. I want to make up for the pain I caused. For a long moment, Lila stood there, struggling with the flood of emotions that Max's words had unleashed. There was part of her that still wanted to believe him. There was part of her that still cared, still longed for the man who had once been the love of her life. But she had spent so many years moving forward, building something that didn't include him, something that felt like her own. And then there was Ethan. Lila felt the familiar pang in her heart whenever she thought of him. He had been there when she needed him most. He had never asked for anything from her, only offering his quiet support, his gentle affection. Ethan had shown her what it meant to love without expectation, without strings attached. The choice, as it always had been, was hers. Max was asking for a second chance. But what about Ethan? What would happen to their quiet love, their peaceful life? Would she be willing to throw all that away for a man who had once left her in pieces? The silence stretched between them, both of them waiting for the other to speak. Max looked at her, his eyes searching, desperate for any sign that she might give him another chance. But Lila knew, deep down, that she couldn't go back. She couldn't keep living in the past, couldn't keep waiting for a love that had already ended. I don't know if I can forgive you, Max, Lila said, her voice barely a whisper. And I don't think I can forget either. The pain you caused me, it's not something I can just brush aside. You can't expect me to just pick up where we left off. We're different people now. She took a step back, her heart heavy but resolute. I need to move forward, and I can't do that if I'm constantly looking back. Max looked like he had been struck by her words. His face fell, the hope in his eyes quickly disappearing. He stepped back, nodding slowly as if accepting the finality of what Lila had said. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I've never stopped loving you, and I never will. But I understand that I've lost you, and I'll have to live with that. As he turned to leave, Lila felt a deep sadness settle in her chest. She had made the right choice. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The ghost of what she and Max had once been would always linger, but now, for the first time, Lila felt free. Free to choose her own future. Free to choose Ethan. As the door closed behind him, Lila stood still for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of what had just happened. But then, she breathed deeply, the weight of the past lifting with every exhale. She had forgiven Max, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. And now it was time to move on. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. The calm that had followed the storm felt like a false sense of peace, one that Lila couldn't seem to embrace. She sat alone on the wooden porch of Ethan's cabin, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of warm tea. The steam rose in delicate spirals, but it did nothing to ease the tension that coiled in her chest. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but the return of Max had shaken her more than she had anticipated. The man who had once promised her the world, only to shatter it, had shown up at the most unexpected moment. His presence, his apologies, and his claims that he had changed, all of it felt like a storm swirling inside of her. But what made the situation even more complicated was the quiet strength that Ethan had offered since the beginning. Ethan, the man who had been there when she was falling apart, the one who had given her shelter, food, and warmth without asking for anything in return. Ethan didn't just see her, he understood her. But in the wake of Max's return, Lila was torn. She had been on her own for so long that the idea of relying on someone else, letting someone else into her life again, felt both comforting and terrifying. Her mind wandered to that moment when Max had reappeared, standing in front of her cabin, looking just as he had all those years ago, handsome, confident, and yet so full of regret. His eyes had told a different story, one of remorse, but Lila couldn't just forget everything. His return felt like a slap to the face. She had spent so long healing from the wounds he left behind, and now here he was, asking for a second chance. But there was Ethan. With every passing day, her bond with Ethan had grown stronger. He was steady, reliable, and gave her the space she needed while also being there when she needed him. He was everything Max wasn't. And yet, the ghost of Max still haunted her, a shadow in her heart that refused to fade. Lila closed her eyes, trying to clear her thoughts. Max had been the love of her life once. He had been her world, and the pain of his betrayal had left scars that she wasn't sure would ever fully heal. But Ethan was different. He was gentle, understanding, and he never pushed her. Yet, the more Ethan had cared for her, the more Lila had feared that it was all too good to be true. The security Ethan gave her felt almost like a promise she couldn't keep. What if she wasn't ready to let go of her past? What if she still loved Max, the version of him that she had once known? She could almost feel his presence now, haunting the edges of her mind. Her thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the door. Ethan stepped outside, his figure outlined against the dimming light. His face was calm, but Lila could sense the tension in his shoulders. He had been patient with her, more patient than anyone ever had the right to be, but she knew the time had come. She had to make a decision. Lila. His voice was soft, as if he were treading carefully. He had seen the battle within her. Are you all right? She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for answers she wasn't sure he could give. He had never pushed her for a decision, never pressured her, but Lila knew he was waiting for her to figure out what she wanted. But what did she want? And was she even capable of knowing the answer to that question? I don't know, she said quietly, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. I don't know what I want anymore, Ethan. Ethan sighed, the sound deep and laden with the weight of unspoken feelings. He walked over to where she was sitting, taking the seat beside her. The space between them was comfortable, natural. You don't have to have all the answers now, he said softly. But I think you should know this. I'm not asking you to choose me, Lila. I'm asking you to choose what's best for you. Choose what makes you happy, because that's all I want for you. Her heart clenched at his words. Ethan wasn't asking for her to pick him. He wasn't demanding anything of her. He just wanted her to be happy. The weight of his sincerity made her throat tighten. How had she been so lucky to find someone like him? And yet, the love she had once felt for Max still lingered, buried beneath the layers of time and pain. I've been thinking a lot, Ethan, Lila began, her voice trembling. I've spent so long being angry with myself, with Max, with everything. But now he's back. And I don't know how to handle it. I don't know if I can forgive him. And I don't know if I can forgive myself for wanting to. Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with the gentlest of expressions, he reached out and placed a hand on hers. It was a small gesture, but it was filled with meaning. You don't need to forgive anyone unless you're ready, Lila. And you don't owe Max anything. He left you. And if you choose to let him back into your life, it should be because you wanna, not because you feel like you have to. Her chest tightened as she absorbed his words. He was right. She didn't owe anyone anything, least of all Max. He had left her once without a second thought. So why should she let him back in? I know, she whispered. I've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore. The Max I knew, the one who loved me, is gone. What's left is just a shadow. I don't know if I can trust him again. Ethan nodded, his thumb lightly brushing against her hand. Trust takes time, Lila. And it's okay if you're not ready to trust him, or anyone for that matter. But you can trust me. I'm not going anywhere. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she needed Ethan's reassurance. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm drowning in all of this. I've spent so much time fighting, but now I'm so tired. I don't know if I can choose between the past and the present. I don't want to hurt anyone. You don't have to choose right now, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. You don't need to make a decision in a moment of pressure. Take your time. And when you're ready, we'll figure it out together. But know this, no matter what, I'm here for you. For a long time, Lila sat in silence, her mind swirling with thoughts, with emotions she couldn't name. Her heart was torn in two, caught between the past she couldn't seem to let go of and the future that was waiting for her, with Ethan standing beside her, unwavering. She realized then, in that moment of quiet, that no matter how much she had loved Max, she could no longer live in that past. The person she had been when she was with him was gone, and the person she had become, standing here with Ethan, was someone who deserved to be loved and cared for without hesitation. I need to be honest with you, Ethan, she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. I think I know what I need to do. He turned to face her, his eyes full of hope but also concern. What is it? I need to let go of Max, she said quietly. I need to stop holding on to the idea of what we had. It's not fair to either of us. I have to choose what's best for me, and I think that's you. Her heart raced as she said the words aloud. She had made her decision, and it felt both terrifying and freeing at the same time. Ethan smiled, a soft, warm smile that reached his eyes. Are you sure? He asked, though he already knew the answer. I'm sure, she replied, her voice steady now. As they sat there, the world around them seemed to fade away. For the first time, Lila felt a sense of peace settling over her. The choice had been hard, but it was hers. And with Ethan beside her, she felt like she could face whatever came next. Lila sat on the porch of Ethan's cabin, the warm sun on her face, but her mind felt like a whirlwind. After weeks of internal struggle, the weight of the decision she had to make pressed down on her heart. Max had come back into her life, asking for forgiveness, begging for another chance. He had apologized, expressed regret, but Lila knew that forgiveness didn't come easy. Not for Max. The life she had started to build with Ethan, the calm that had enveloped her when she was with him, seemed to shimmer with uncertainty now. She had been through so much with Max, so much pain, so much heartache, and she couldn't ignore the love that had once been there. But love didn't always last. Did it? At least not the kind of love that was built on betrayal, lies, and promises broken. Max had hurt her in ways that no apology could undo. Ethan had been there for her when she needed him most. He had never pushed, never asked for anything except for her trust. And Lila had slowly let her walls down. She had started to imagine a future with him, a future free of the past. But now, with Max back in the picture, those walls were crumbling, and she found herself at a crossroads, unsure of where to go. The morning had passed quietly, and Ethan had been patient with her. He hadn't asked her to make a decision yet, but she could feel the tension in the air. The unspoken question hanging between them. Would she choose Ethan? Or would she go back to Max? The decision wasn't easy. Lila had spent so many years with Max, and part of her still clung to the hope that things could be like they once were. But the other part of her, the part that had healed, the part that had learned to be independent, the part that had found solace in Ethan's quiet strength, knew that going back to Max would only undo all the progress she had made. The past was gone. Max was gone. And the person she had become couldn't live in that shadow anymore. She had been with Max once, and she had loved him deeply. But she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. That love had turned toxic, and the pain of it had left scars that would never fully heal. Lila knew that if she chose Max, she would always be looking back, always wondering if things would ever be different. But if she chose Ethan, she could look forward, and for the first time in a long time, she could feel the possibility of a real, true future. Ethan came outside, his presence a calm, steady force. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. He just sat beside her, waiting, letting her find her own way. Finally, Lila broke the silence. Her voice was shaky, but she knew the time had come. I've been thinking about everything you said, about everything that's happened, she began. Her eyes were focused on the ground, her hands nervously twisting the fabric of her shirt. I've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore. I've been hoping for a love that isn't coming back, and I think it's time I let it go. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just sat there beside her, his presence a comfort, as if he already knew the decision she was about to make. I've spent so much time grieving over what Max and I had, Lila continued. And I thought that if I could just get him to change, things could go back to how they were. But they can't. I can't go back to that. I can't keep waiting for something that was never real. She paused, taking a deep breath. The words felt like they were choking her, but she needed to say them. For herself. For Ethan. I don't want to keep hurting myself with the past. And I don't want to hurt you, Ethan. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes full of understanding. You don't have to apologize for feeling the way you do, Lila, he said softly. I'm not asking you to choose me. I'm asking you to choose yourself. Choose what makes you happy. Tears filled Lila's eyes as she looked at him. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. How much she needed him to understand that this wasn't just about her choosing between two men. It was about her choosing to heal, to move on, to find peace again. I've spent so much of my life giving pieces of myself to others, she said, her voice shaking. I've spent so much time trying to please others, to fix things that were broken. But I never took the time to fix myself. I never took the time to figure out who I really am. Ethan reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You don't have to fix everything at once. But I'm here for you, Lila. Always. She squeezed his hand, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. She knew she was making the right decision, even though it was the hardest thing she had ever done. Max had been a part of her life for so long, but she couldn't keep living in the past. She couldn't keep holding on to a dream that had already died. It was time to move forward, to embrace the future with someone who was willing to be with her in the present. I think I've known the answer for a while, she said softly. I need to let go of Max. I need to forgive him, for my own peace, and I need to move on. And I need to move on with you, Ethan. Her words were like a weight being lifted from her chest, and as she said them, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was choosing what was best for her. Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up with joy and relief. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gentle, reassuring kiss that told her everything she needed to know. I'm so proud of you, Lila, he whispered. You don't have to carry the weight of the past anymore. You've chosen to move forward. And that's the bravest thing you can do. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally came, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of freedom, of finally being able to let go. Lila wrapped her arms around Ethan, holding on to him as if he were her lifeline, her anchor in a world that had once felt so chaotic. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. Ethan hugged her tighter. You don't need to apologize. You're here now. That's all that matters. As they held each other, Lila knew that the hardest part was over. She had made the decision to move on from Max, to forgive him for what he had done, and to choose the future she wanted with Ethan. It wasn't going to be easy. There would still be moments of doubt, moments when the past would try to claw its way back into her life. But for now, she had made the choice. She had chosen herself. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that she was ready to face whatever the future had in store. Lila sat by the window of their cozy cabin, watching the golden light of the morning sun filter through the trees. The world outside seemed at peace, just as it was inside her heart now. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. There was no longer any weight pulling her down, no lingering shadows from the past. The storm had passed, and she was ready to embrace the calm. It had been a few months since the decision to let go of Max and move forward with Ethan. The decision had been hard, but it had been the right one. With each passing day, Lila found herself falling more in love with Ethan, not just because of his kindness and patience, but because he had taught her what it truly meant to love and be loved. They had built something together, something real, something lasting. Their days were filled with simple joys, cooking together, walking through the woods, and laughing with Ben, Lila's young son, who had become the heart of their little family. Ethan had embraced the role of father figure with a quiet grace, never trying to replace Ben's biological father, but instead offering him love and support in a way that felt genuine and unforced. But despite the happiness she had found, Lila couldn't forget the importance of Ethan's patience and understanding throughout the entire journey. When Max had reappeared, when her world had been turned upside down, Ethan had stood by her without hesitation. He had never once pressured her, never demanded her love or her time. He had simply been there, steady and unwavering, like the rock she had needed.
Now,
As she sat beside him on the porch, watching the birds flit through the trees, she realized that this was everything she had ever wanted. This was the love she had once dreamed of. The love that wasn't born from turmoil or heartbreak, but from trust, patience, and understanding. Ben ran across the yard, his small figure darting between the trees as he called out to them. "Mom." "Ethan, look what I found." His face was bright with excitement, and Lila smiled as she watched him proudly hold up a rock he had discovered in the yard. Ethan chuckled and gave Ben a playful nod. "That's a big one," he said, his voice warm and encouraging.
Ben beamed.
"I thought it could be a treasure," he said, his innocent excitement infectious. Lila and Ethan exchanged a look that said everything. In this small, peaceful moment, everything felt right. This was their life now, their little family, built on love and trust, free from the burdens of the past. Over the weeks, Lila had started to let go of the guilt that had once weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had come to realize that forgiving Max wasn't about giving him another chance. It was about freeing herself. Ethan had never asked her to forget her past, but he had shown her that she didn't have to be defined by it. She could move forward, she could build a new life, and she could do it with someone who truly cared for her. That evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the sky with hues of purple and pink, Lila, Ethan, and Ben sat down for dinner at the small wooden table in their cabin. The food was simple, but it didn't matter. There was laughter, there were stories, and there was love. As Ben chattered about his day at school, Ethan reached over and gently squeezed Lila's hand under the table. She looked up at him, her heart swelling with affection. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just happy to be here with you." Her eyes filled with tears as she gazed at him. Lila had never imagined that she would find this kind of happiness. She had been broken once, lost in the wreckage of a past that had nearly consumed her. But now, with Ethan, she had built something entirely new, something that was hers to keep. As the evening wore on, they sat around the table, talking and laughing as Ben told stories from school. It wasn't just a typical evening. It was their evening, a symbol of how far they had come, how much they had built together. It was love that wasn't perfect but was real and grounded in the simple, everyday moments. Later, when Ben was asleep, tucked safely into bed, Lila and Ethan sat by the fire, the crackling flames casting warm shadows on their faces. They didn't need to say much. Their silence was enough. Lila leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, the sense of comfort she had longed for in all her years of searching. "Do you ever think about the past?" Lila asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan paused, thinking for a moment before answering. "I think about how it shaped us, how we've learned from it. But I don't live in the past, Lila. I live in the present, and right now, this is everything I want." Lila smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She understood. She had learned, too, that the past didn't define them. It was the choices they made in the present, the love they chose to build, that mattered. And she had chosen Ethan. She had chosen this life, this love. And she would continue to choose it every day for the rest of her life. As the firelight flickered and the stars above twinkled brightly, Lila closed her eyes, content, at peace, and full of love. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. She had found her true love, and together with Ethan and Ben, they would build a future full of laughter, love, and joy. And as the night deepened, Lila knew that, while their story was just beginning, this was the life she had always dreamed of. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.